Hello, guys and gals. This is part 5 of our reading of Alfred Hitchcock Presents Stories Not for the Nervous. And we're going to go over this. The copyright information here says the author gratefully acknowledges the invaluable assistance of Robert Arthur in the preparation of this volume. And you're going to see all the copyright information here. All the different publishing stuff, all the copyrights, all the different printings. And we're going to go over the acknowledgments too, not audibly, but they will be on the screen. Now, in the last part, it was a week ago since I made this video, the last video rather. So we are gonna have to try and remember. There was a guy in a smoking lounge, and he was relating a story about a metal worker. We'll call him a metal worker. He's an artist. We'll call him, and he's telling a story about this artist. And, oh, by the way, we are reading The Man with Copper Fingers by Dorothy L. And we're probably going to finish the story today, but maybe not. Yeah, we should. But anyways, let's go. Okay, we're going to change this to that. Okay. Loader. Okay, that's right. I'm probably going to have to go back a little way, so a lot of this is going to be repeat, but we're going to... Well, there was an advertisement that he'd pay for himself, so I agreed. I had accepted an engagement to go on with Misto Films Limited, the fake of Dead Men's Bush, the Dwarf Men picture, take on the spot among the Australian bushmen. I wired them that I would join them at Sydney the third week in April and took my bags out to Loader. Loader greeted me very cordially, though I thought he looked older, and when I last saw him, he had certainly grown more nervous in his manner. He was, how shall I describe it, more intense, more real, in a way. He brought out his pet cynicism, as if he thoroughly meant them, and more with that air of getting at you personally. I used to think his disbelief in everything was a kind of artistic pose, but I began to feel I had done him an injustice. He was really unhappy. I could see that quite well, and soon I discovered the reason. As we were driving out in the car, I asked about Maria. She has left me, he said. Well, now, that really surprised me. Honestly, I hadn't thought the girl had that much initiative. On her own, she wanted so much. Oh, wait a minute. Initiative on her own. Initiative. Why, I said, had she gone and set up that restaurant of her own? She wanted so much? Oh, she talked to you about restaurants, did she? Said Loader. I suppose you are one of the men that women tell things to. No, she made a fool of herself. She's gone. I didn't quite know what to say. He was so obviously hurt in his vanity. You know as well as in his feelings. I muttered the usual things and added that it must be a great loss to his work as well as other things. He said it was. I asked him when it had happened and whether he's finished the nymph he was working on before I left. He said, oh yes, he'd finished that and done another, something pretty original, which I should like. Well, we got to the house and dined, and Loader told me he was going to Europe shortly, a few days after I left myself, in fact. The nymph stood in the dining room in a special niche left in the wall. It really was a beautiful thing, not so showy as most of Loader's work, and a wonderful likeness of Maria. Loader put me opposite it so that I could see it during dinner, and really I could hardly take my eyes off it. He seemed very proud of it and kept on telling me over and over again how glad he was that I liked it. It struck me that he was falling into a trick of repeating himself. We went into the smoking room after dinner. He'd had it rearranged, and the first thing that caught my eye was a big settee drawn before the fire. It stood about a couple of feet from the ground and consisted of a base made like a Roman couch, with cushions and a highish back, all made of oak with a silver inlay, and on top of this forming the actual seat one sat on. If you follow me, there was a great silver figure of a nude woman, fully life-size, lying with her head back and her arms extended along the sides of the couch. A few big, loose cushions made it possible to use the thing as an actual settee, though I must say it never was really comfortable to sit on respectably. As a stage prop for registering dissipation, it would have been excellent, but to see Loder sprawl over it by his own fireside gave me a kind of shock. He seemed very much attached to it, though. "I told you," he said, it was something original. Then I looked more closely at it and saw that the figure actually was Maria's, though the face was rather sketchily done, if you understand what I mean. I suppose he thought the bolder treatment more suited the piece of the bolder treatment more suited to a piece of furniture. But I did begin to think Loder a trifle degenerate when I saw that couch, and in the fortnight that followed I grew more and more uncomfortable with him. That personal manner of his grew more marked every day, and sometimes while I was giving him sittings, he would sit there and tell one of the most beastly things, that with his eyes fixed on it in the nastiest way, just to see how one would take it. Upon my word, though, he certainly did me uncommonly well. I began to feel I'd be more at ease among the bushmen. Well, now I come to the odd thing. Everybody sat up and listened a little more eagerly. It was the evening before I had to leave New York. Went on Varden. I was sitting. Hey, someone opened the door of the brown room, to be greeted by a warning sign from Baines. The intruder sank obscurely into a large chair and mixed himself a whiskey with extreme care not to disturb the speaker. "I was sitting in the smoking room," continued Varden, "waiting for Loder to come in. I had the house to myself, for Loder had given the servants leave to go to some show or lecture or other, and he himself was getting his things together for his European trip, and had to keep an appointment with this man of business. I must have been very nearly asleep, because it was dusk when I came to with a start and saw a young man quite close to me. He wasn't at all like a housebreaker, and still less like a ghost. He was, I must almost say, exceptionally ordinary looking. He was dressed in a gray English suit and a fawn overcoat on his arm, and his soft hat and stick in his arm, and his soft hat and stick in his hand. He had sleek, pale hair, and one of those rather stupid faces with a long nose and a monocle. I stared at him, for I knew the front door was locked, and before I could get my wits together, he spoke. He had a curious, hesitating, husky voice and a strong English accent. He said surprisingly, "Are you Mr. Varden?" "You have the advantage of me," I said. He said, "Please excuse me butting in. I know it looks like bad manners, but you'd better clear out of this place very quickly, don't you know?" "What the heck do you mean?" I said. He said, "I don't mean it in any impertinent way, but you must realize that Loder's never forgiven you, and I'm afraid he means to make you into a hat stand or an electric lamp fitting or something of that sort. My goodness, I can tell you I felt strange. It was sure it was such a quiet voice, and his manners were perfect, and yet the words were quite meaningless. I remember that madmen are supposed to be extra strong and edged towards the bell. And then it came over me with rather a chill that I was alone in the house. How did you get here? I asked, putting a bold face on it. I'm afraid I picked the lock, he said, as casually as though he were apologizing for not having a card about him. I couldn't be sure Loader hadn't come back, but I do really think you had better get out as quickly as possible. See here, I said, who are you and what the heck are you driving at? What do you mean about Loader never forgiving me? Forgiving me what? Why, he said, about, you will pardon my prancing on your private affairs, won't you? About Morano. What about her, in the devil's name? I cried. What do you even know about her anyway? She went off while I was at the war. What's it to do with me? Oh, said the odd young man. I beg your pardon. Perhaps I have been relying too much on Loader's judgment. Darned foolish. But the possibility of him being mistaken did not occur to me. He fancies you were Maria Morano's lover when you were here last time. Maria's lover? I said. Preposterous. She went off with her man, whoever he was. He must know she didn't. He must know she didn't go with me. Maria never left the house, said the young man. And if you don't get out of it this moment, I won't answer for you ever leaving either. In goodness' name, I cried, exasperated. What do you mean? The man turned and threw the blue cushions off the foot of the silver couch. Have you ever examined the toes of this? He asked. Not particularly, I said, more and more astonished. Why should I? Did you ever know Loader to make any figure of her? But this, with the short toe on the left foot, he went on. Well, I did have a look at it then, and saw it was as he said. The left foot had a short second toe. So it is, I said, but after all, why not? Why not indeed, the young man said. Wouldn't you like to see why? Of all the figures Loader made of Maria Morano, this is the only one that has the feet of the living woman. He picked up the poker. Look, he said, with a lot more strength than I should have expected from him. He brought the head of the poker down with a heavy crack on the silver couch. It struck one of the arms of the figure nearly at the elbow point, smashing a jagged hole in the silver. He retched at the arm and brought it away. It was hollow, and as I'm alive, I tell you, there was a long, dry arm bone inside it. Varden paused and put away a good mouthful of whiskey. Well? Cried several breathless voices. Well, said Varden, I'm not ashamed to say I went out of the house like an old buck rabbit that hears the man with a gun. There was a car standing just outside, and the driver opened the door. I tumbled in, and then it came over me that the whole thing might have been a trap, and I tumbled out again and ran till I reached the trolley car, but found my bags at the station next day, registered for Vancouver. When I pulled myself together, I did rather wonder what Loader was thinking about my disappearance, but could no more have gone back into that horrible house than I could have taken poison. I left for Vancouver the next morning, and from that day to this, I never saw either of those men again. I've still not the faintest idea who the fair man was, or what became of him, but I heard in a roundabout way that Loader was dead, in some kind of an accident, I fancy. There was a pause, then, It's a darned good story, Mr. Varden, said Armstrong. He was a dabber in various kinds of handiwork. dabbler in various kinds of handiwork, and was indeed chiefly responsible for Mr. Arbuthnot's motion to ban wireless. But are you suggesting there was a complete skeleton inside the silver casing, the silver casting? Do you mean Loader put it into the core of the mold when the casting was done? It would be awfully difficult and dangerous. The slightest accident would have put him at the mercy of the workmen, and that statue must have been considerably over life-size to allow for the skeleton being well covered. Mr. Varden has unintentionally misled you, Armstrong, said a quiet, husky voice suddenly from the shadow behind Varden's chair. The figure was not silver, but electroplated on a copper base deposited directly on the body. The lady was Sheffield plated, in fact. I fancy the soft parts of her must have been digested away with sorry, it's hard to read because the book is with person or some preparation of some kind. Pepsin or some preparation of some kind after the process was complete, but I can't be positive about that. Hello, Wimpsy, said Armstrong. Was that you came in just now? And why the confident pronouncement? The effect of Wimpsy's voice on Varden had been extraordinary. He had leapt to his feet and turned the lamp so as to light up Wimpsy's face. Good evening, Mr. Varden, said Lord Peter. I'm delighted to meet you again, and I apologize for my unceremonious behavior on the occasion of our last encounter. Varden took the proffered hand, but was speechless. Do you mean to say you mad mystery monger, that you were Varden's great unknown? Demanded Bayers. Ah, well, he added rudely. We might have guessed it from his vivid description. Well, since you're here, said Smith Harrington, the morning yell man, I think you ought to come across with the rest of the story. Was it just a joke? Asked Judson. Of course not, inferred Pettifer, before Lord Peter had time to reply. Why should it be? Wimpsy's seen enough strange things not to have to waste his time inventing them. That's true enough, said Bayes. Comes to having deductive powers and all that sort of thing, and always sticking one's nose into things that are better not investigated. That's all very, very well, Bayes, said his lordship, but if I hadn't just mentioned the matter to Mr. Varden that evening, where would he be? Ah, where? That's exactly what we want to know, demanded Smith Harrington. Come on, Wimpsy. No shirking. We must have the tale. And the whole tale, added Pettifer. And nothing but the tale, said Armstrong dexterously, whisking away the whiskey bottle and the cigars from under Lord Peter's nose. Get on with it, old son. Not a smoke do you smoke, and not a sup do you sip till Bird Ellen is set free. Brute, said his lordship plaintively. As a matter of fact, he went on with a change of tone, it's not really a story I want to get about. It might land me a very unpleasant sort of position. Manslaughter, probably, and murder, possibly. Gosh, said Baines. That's all right, said Armstrong. Nobody's going to talk. We can't afford to lose you from the club. You know, Smith Harrington will have to control his passion for copy, that's all. Pledges of discretion have been given all around. Lord Peter settled himself back and began the tale. The cushion, the curious case of Eric P. Loader, affords one more instance of the strange manner in which some power beyond our puny human wills arranges the affairs of men. Call it providence, call it destiny. We'll call it off, said Baines. You can leave out that part. Lord Peter groaned and began again. Well, the first thing that made me feel a bit inquisitive about Loder was a casual remark by a man at the immigration office in New York, where I happened to go, about that silly affair of old Mrs. Biltz, he said. What on earth is Eric Loder going to do in Australia? I should have thought Europe was more in his line. Australia, I said. You're wondering, dear old thing? He told me the other day he was off to Italy in 3 weeks' time. Italy, nothing, he said. He was all over our place today, talking about how you got to Sydney and what were the necessary formalities and so on. Oh, I said, I suppose he's going by the Pacific route and calling at Sydney on his way, but I wondered why he hadn't said so when I'd met him the day before. He had distinctly talked about sailing from Europe and doing doing parts before he went on to Rome. I felt so darned inquisitive that I went and called on Loder 2 nights later. He seemed quite pleased to see me and was full of his forthcoming trip. I asked him again about the route, and he told me quite distinctly he was going via Paris. Well, that was that, and it wasn't really any of my business, and we chatted about other things. He told me that Mr. Varden was coming on to stay with him before he went, and that he hoped to get him to pose for a figure before he left. He said he'd never seen a man so perfectly formed. I meant to get him to do it before, he said, but war broke out, and he went and joined the army before I had time to start. He was lolling on that beastly couch of his at the time, and happened to look round at him. I caught such a nasty sort of glitter in his eye that it gave me quite the turn. He was stroking the figure over the neck and grinning at it. None of your efforts in Sheffield Plate, I hope, said I. Well, he said, I thought of making a kind of companion to this, the sleeping athlete, or something of that sort. You'd much better cast it, I said. Why did you put the stuff on so thick? It destroys the line detail. That annoyed him. He never liked to hear any objection made to that work of art. This was experimental, he said. I mean the next to be a real masterpiece. You'll see. We'd got to about that point when the butler came in and asked should I make up a bed for me, as it was such a bad night. We hadn't noticed the weather particularly, though. It had looked a bit threatening when I started from New York. However, we now looked out and saw that it was coming down in sheets and torrents. It wouldn't have mattered, only that I'd brought a little open racing car and no overcoat, and certainly the prospect of 5 miles in the downpour wasn't altogether attractive. Loder urged me to stay, and I said I would. I was feeling a bit fagged, which I looked up meant tired or tuckered in British slang. I was feeling a bit fagged, so I went to bed right off. Loder said he wanted to do a bit of work in the studio first, and I saw him depart along the corridor. You won't allow me to mention Providence, so I'll only say it was a very remarkable thing that I should have woken up at 2 a.m. to find myself lying in a pool of water. The man had stuck a hot water bottle into the bed because it hadn't been used just lately, and the beastly thing had gone and unstoppered itself. I lay awake for 10 minutes in the deeps of damp misery before I had sufficient strength of mind to investigate. Then I found it was hopeless. Sheets, blankets, mattress, all soaked. I looked at the armchair and then I had a brilliant idea. I remembered there was a lovely great divan in the studio with a big skin rug and a pile of cushions. Why not finish the night there? I took a little electric torch, which always goes about with me, and started off. The studio was empty, so I supposed Loader had finished and trotted off to roost. The divan was there, all right, with an unseen drawn with a screen drawn partly across it, so I rolled myself up under the rug and prepared to doze off. I was just getting beautifully sleepy again when I heard footsteps, not in the passage, but apparently on the other side of the room. I was surprised because I didn't know there was any way out in that direction. I lay low, and presently I saw a streak of light appear from the cupboard where Loader kept his tools and things. The streak widened, and Loader emerged carrying an electric torch. He closed the cupboard door very gently after him and padded across the studio. He stopped before the easel and uncovered it. I could see him through the crack in the screen. He stood for some minutes gazing at a sketch on the easel, and then gave one of the nastiest gurgling laughs I'd ever had the pleasure of hearing. If I'd even seriously thought of announcing my unauthorized presence, I abandoned all idea of it then. Presently he covered the easel again and went out by the door at which he had come in. Okay. I don't think that we didn't get very far in this one, did we? Okay, well, we'll get through this the next time. Anyways, we have been reading Alfred Hitchcock Presents, Stories Not for the Nervous, and we have been reading The Man with the Copper Fingers, by Dorothy L. Sayers. If you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe, ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, all the information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.